The long sleeve version of the Aspen dress features a classic shirt sleeve with a slit in the sleeve and a cuff opening. In this tutorial, we're going to be showing you how to attach the sleeve slit binding. So these are all the pattern pieces that you need to assemble your sleeve. So you've got your sleeve piece here with the sleeve slit already cut. We've got our sleeve slit binding and the cuff of the sleeve here. And the piece that we're focusing on today is the sleeve slit binding, and we're going to use that to bind this raw edge in the slit. So we're going to be opening it up, attaching the binding and folding it round to enclose all of the raw edges so that when the slit's closed, you don't have any raw edges showing. The first thing we're going to do is press a 6mm turn up along one long edge of the binding. We're not actually going to use this till a little bit later on, but it's much easier to pre-press it now while the binding's flat. And to help me, I'm going to use this hot hammer tool. And this is great because it's heat resistant, so you can iron over the top of it, and it's got these measurements on it. And the measurement that we're turning up is 6mm, which is just above this line here, which is at 5mm. So I'm going to line the hammer along there. I'm going to fold the fabric and make sure that it's falling just over the 5mm line like that. Then if you grab your iron and you can press all the way along that edge to set the crease in at 6mm. So the next step that we've done here is the stay stitching, which is at 4mm all the way around the slit. And this is going to give strength to the fabric, especially when we try and open it up here. A little tip, if you shorten your stitch length to 1, you'll be able to get really nice and neat into those corners. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to snip from the top of this slit into these corners, not going through the stitching line, and that will enable the fabric to open up into a straight line. The first thing we do here is to fold the sleeve slit binding in half just to find the centre of it. Just give it a little finger press there. And then I'm going to line up that centre with the slit in the sleeve. And you want to make sure that the edge of the binding sits at the top of the slit. So you're not lining it up with the stitching, you're lining it up with the slit. And then you're going to pin this in place. So you can see now we opened up that slit and we pinned the binding all the way along it. And if I turn it over, you can see those little, that little Y-shaped notches that we made at the top of the slit have allowed the fabric to open up and lie flat. Your binding will be a bit longer at each end, but don't worry, that makes it easier to work with, and we're going to trim that off later. So the next thing I'm going to do is to sew with a 6mm seam allowance along here. I would recommend doing it with the sleeve side up, so you can keep an eye on this fabric here to make sure you don't get any excess fabric or puckers in this area here. And if you're really struggling to keep this nice and flat, you can always move the edge of this fabric down ever so slightly and stitch closer to this stay stitching line here in the middle, and that'll just help to keep it flat. I've now attached the slit binding to the sleeve with the 6mm seam allowance, and you can see I've gone a little bit closer with the stitching at the point in the middle to stop puckering. So once it's attached, you'll need to press all of these seam allowances in towards the binding. And this is the edge that you pressed over right at the beginning. And with that edge, you're going to fold it in half so that the edge goes just over the stitching that attaches the binding to the sleeve. And as you can see, that has really cleverly enclosed all of those loose edges. So do that all the way along the edge of the split, and then you're going to press it and pin it in place for stitching. I've now edge stitched the binding in place from the inside there, and you can see if you turn it over, you will see a line of stitching on the outside. If you want to look at some alternative methods of finishing that won't show the stitching on the outside, you can flip it over and sew from the outside and stitch in the ditch along there, and then that will catch this edge here. Alternatively, you could sew it from the inside by hand, which would also give you an invisible finish on the outside. So now your binding is attached. The next thing you want to do is close the binding like this, and then you're going to do a little line of stitching diagonally across the top, and this will hold the binding closed once the garment's being worn. Now that you've secured the binding here, we're going to open the sleeve up. And then with this binding, one side of it needs to fold out and one side folds underneath. So when the sleeve is closed, it looks like this. So this is the right-hand sleeve. So we're going to fold under the right-hand side, and that's the side that's furthest away from the underarm sleeve. If you put a couple of stitches here just to secure that and keep it in place, and now your sleeve is ready to add your gathering stitches and attach the cuff.